I'm Mark Halperin.
And I'm John Heilemann. And with all due respect to Donald Trump, you'd think with those bone spurs in your feet, it wouldn't be so easy to plant them both so firmly in your mouth. Happy National Lollipop Day, sports fans. On the show tonight, some candidates chat and a new economy spat. But first, again, Donald Trump. Over the weekend in Ames, Iowa, Mark asked Trump about his suggestion that John McCain is no war hero and whether Trump might be his own worst enemy.
Do you think your campaign could be hurt, as past candidates have been, by things you say that people jump onto that?
I don't know. You know what? I don't know. All I can do is be me. I have to be me. And if I'm not me, I'm not being true. I'm a very honest person, and I have to be who I am. And people like what I say.
But you're picking fights with people like John McCain, or
I'm not picking fights. No. John McCain picked a fight with me.
Mark, we've had a rare moment of bipartisan unity today on this issue. From the left to the far right, everybody's rallying around John McCain and trashing Donald Trump. But my question to you is, in the end, will Trump survive this flap? Will he maybe even thrive from this flap? Or will he take a dive from this flap?
Well, we're waiting for some polling to figure out exactly what the initial thing is. You know, I don't know the answer to this one, except I will say, someone who liked Trump before this, I can't imagine that this is what's going to turn him off. Of all the other outrageous things, including leading the birther movement that he's done, I can't imagine that this will be the breaking point for too many people.
It seems to me they might change the dynamic in this way, right? There were a lot of Republicans who were a little bit afraid to take on Trump. This has opened the door to a lot of criticism. Certainly a lot of that is establishment criticism, doesn't matter much to him. But look, veterans are a big part of the Republican base. Some Republicans who like Donald Trump are veterans and also really like John McCain and think he's a hero.
Yeah, you know, Rush Limbaugh defended him today. There weren't too many other staunch defended Trump.
Yes,
he didn't have too many other defenders. I do believe that elites can't accurately judge this, because while there's some veterans who will be turned off by this without a doubt, I think we got to wait and see how Trump does. And remember, Trump is not at 40%.
No,
Trump is at like 15, 16, 17%. That percentage, I think, may well stick with him. But we shall see.
All right.
Also in Iowa this weekend, Scott Walker did 3 full days of RV barnstorming, and he did some interviews. A few of his answers got noticed, such as when he was pressed by CNN's Dana Bash on whether being gay is a choice. Walker's reply, I don't know. Also, in Plainfield, Iowa, Walker was confronted by an undocumented immigrant from Wisconsin who brought his kids along and told the candidate that he and his wife live in fear of deportation. That exchange on the part of the family got somewhat emotional. John, Walker remains in first place in Iowa. Are these moments reflective of a problem with his candidate skills, or are they just media-driven flaps?
I don't think they're just media-driven flaps. I think they are. He has put his foot in his mouth, just as Donald Trump has, on a variety of issues in various settings in the past. These things are partly putting foot in mouth in terms of how he is handling them, but they're also part of his relentless focus on Iowa and wanting to make sure that no one gets to his right in that state that is crucial to his nomination prospects.
The Bush and Walker campaigns are going to tip tonight on Iran, and whether Walker's being too rash and saying he might bomb, take military action the first day. I do believe that one of Walker's vulnerabilities right now is donors and other Republican elites wanting to know, is he major league? This has been a question all along. And these flaps, I think he handled the immigration thing, given he had upset young kids
horribly.
there. Not horribly at all. But this
Although you never want to leave kids in tears on camera anywhere.
This question of sure-footed replies to tough questions is one that a lot of people are watching closely.
Well, and it goes to this question raised by the New York Times and raised by a lot of people we know. Is he smart enough to be president? He's clearly a winner. He's a fighter. He's all the things he says. He's had a great electoral success in Wisconsin. But is he brainy enough?
He's brainy enough.
But I'm saying that this is something Republicans are asking. This is a question that's out there.
I think most of them are asking not brainy enough. Is he sophisticated enough to handle the tough questions that come from the press and the public in presidential politics?
Fair enough, but sophisticated and smart, as you know, are sometimes code words for each other.
Yeah, maybe. But I think I spent some time with him in Iowa Saturday night. He is a great retail politician. He's a great fit for the state, and he's so confident. But I do think that on this Iran thing, he's still going to have to prove to people he is sophisticated enough, not just to be president, but to beat Hillary Clinton.
You can be against the Iran deal without being the bomb Iran guy. Right. Okay. In Gotham City, our home, Mayor Bill de Blasio wants to put the brakes on Uber. The company has fired back by mocking him within its app and with a campaign-style negative ad assault. We see your hand there, David Plouffe. And in case you think this is just a local New York issue, let us remind you that Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio last week sung Uber's praises while Hillary Clinton took a swipe at the on-demand economy in a speech she gave in New York. Also, Mark, my question to you, is Uber destined to become a 2016 wedge issue?
Uber and the sharing economy are for sure. Jeb Bush knows where he is on this. He's been very out front. Other Republicans, also Rand Paul and others. I think it's up to Hillary Clinton to say what she wants to do here, because this is a classic case where a lot of the people in the country don't want government involved in this part of the economy.
Unions, incumbent industries are afraid of Uber. They're afraid of Airbnb. They're afraid of a lot of these new companies that are disruptive, innovative companies. It's easy for Republicans to be for it because they're for the free market. It's a wedge issue because it puts Hillary Clinton in a bind. She gets a lot of money from Silicon Valley. She wants to be seen as the future, not the past. And if she's on the side of the unions and incumbent industries, she's not that.
You know what some people say? A conservative is a liberal who couldn't find a cab and used Uber.
That's exactly right.
The market is so powerful in all these areas, and it's the kind of thing that will tie Democrats like Hillary Clinton in knots because of the competing pressures.
And the argument that Uber's making that, you got a lot of African-American Hispanics out in the outer boroughs who can't get cabs but can get Uber. Very powerful.
All right, up next, conversations with Scott Walker, Ted Cruz, and Martin O'Malley. But first, this word from our sponsors. I know you're a tireless guy, but I've never seen you in a bad mood. Are you ever in a bad mood?
No. Yeah, literally, you get out in crowds like this. That's what energizes me. You can't be down when people come out and stay this long in the heat like this.
You miss your own bed?
Yeah, it's like after a while, forget what it even is anymore.
As part of my conversation with Scott Walker in Haverhill, Iowa, late Saturday night, Walker was one of several 2016 hopefuls I spoke to in the Hawkeye State this weekend, including Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Earlier Saturday, shortly after the Trump-McCain controversy blew up, we caught up with the Texas senator at the Family Leadership Summit in Ames. It was truly a lights, camera, action moment because the setting was a dressing room. Cruz and I started out talking about the presidents he's met.
You know both President Bushes.
Yes.
Have you ever met any besides President Obama? Have you met other presidents? President Clinton, President Reagan?
You know, I haven't. I haven't met President Clinton. I saw Ronald Reagan speak at the 1992 convention, but I never met him. That was one of my great regrets. I would have loved to have met Reagan.
So obviously being a senator is a qualification for president. You've done other things in public life. Talk about anything from before you ran for elective office that kind of you feel helps prepare you in terms of experience or temperament to be president.
Well, before I was in the Senate, I was the Solicitor General of Texas, which is the chief lawyer for the state in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And that is an executive position that I held 5.5 years. And during that time, over and over again, we led the nation fighting to defend conservative principles and winning on a national level. So we defended the Ten Commandments monument that's on the state capitol grounds. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court, won 5-4. We defended the Pledge of Allegiance, the words one nation under God, went to the Supreme Court, won unanimously. We defended the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, went to the Supreme Court, won 5-4.
And all that prepared you to be president. How?
Because it was walking the walk and defending conservative principles. I think the central issue in the Republican primary is trust. Who can you trust? You know, the problem that we see all the time are what I call campaign conservatives, which is candidates who on the campaign trail say they're terribly conservative, and yet they get elected and they don't follow their campaign promises. Every one of us should ask any candidate who shows up in front of you, you say you believe these principles. Show me. When have you stood up and fought for them? When have you bled for them? And what have you accomplished? As the Scripture says, you shall know them by their fruits.
Leave aside President Reagan for a moment. Just tell me other presidents and traits they had that if you were president you'd like to emulate or try to match.
Well, you obviously started with where I would go first, which was Reagan, and he was my hero. Look, there are many other presidents who are admirable. Certainly Abraham Lincoln.
Just what about Lincoln is
Lincoln
what?
Endured enormous pressure as the country was ripped apart, and he had a steadfastness and a peace and clarity and consistency and moral vision. I'll give you another example of a president, George W. Bush. George W. Bush, when he stood on that pile of rubble after 9/11 and told the grieving people across this country that I hear you, and the terrorists who knocked down these buildings are going to hear you soon. That was a moment where every one of us...
What was the trait or traits you think he showed there that you'd like to have as president?
Strength clarity. He inspired every American. That touched our souls. He stood strong when America was under attack. That's a president's first responsibility.
In the wake of Iraq and Afghanistan, I'm wondering where you think the country is, not where Ted Cruz is, but where is the country on the use of American military force overseas now?
Well, you know, I think often in foreign policy it gets framed as a binary choice. You're either a hawk and want to invade everybody, or a dove and are terrified to use military force. I think most Americans are at a place in between. You know, I have described my foreign policy views as a third point on the triangle, very much along the lines of Ronald Reagan, that I think, number one, the president should be a clarion voice for freedom, that the bully pulpit of the presidency is powerful. I think if and when military force is required, it should follow three principles. Number one, it should always, always, always be directly connected to vital U.S. national security interests. That's the touchstone.
What's an example of that from the last 20 years?
Well, let me finish the principles and then I'll come right back to that. Number two, we should use overwhelming force. And number three, we should get the heck out. It's not the job of our military to transform foreign countries into democratic utopias. It is the job to hunt down and kill our enemies before they murder innocent Americans.
So what's a military action by the U.S. in the last 20 years that meets all three of those?
So let me give you two examples that are both from recent history that illustrate where I wouldn't and where I would consider the use of military force. Where I wouldn't is Syria. Now listen, Bashar Assad is a monster who's murdered hundreds of thousands of his own citizens, women and children, and yet the enemy of my enemy is not necessarily my friend. At the time, 2 years ago, the question I kept asking the administration was, okay, if the military attack is successful and you topple Assad, and the chemical weapons fall into the hands of Al-Qaeda or Al-Nusra or ISIS, how does that make us any safer? Radical Islamic terrorists who would use them against Americans, against Europeans, against Israelis. The administration had no coherent answer to that, so I opposed direct military force there. Now let me give you another example. Iran. I think the single greatest threat that this country faces today is the threat of a nuclear Iran. I think the Obama nuclear deal is a catastrophic mistake. It is my hope that Congress in the next 60 days stands up and stops it. That's going to depend on Democrats deciding they're willing to put national security and the lives and safety of millions of Americans above partisan loyalty to the Obama White House.
But there's no recent last 20 years, there's no military action you would say that met the three-part Cruz test?
Look, there's no doubt going into Afghanistan after 9/11, after the Taliban, was justified.
But that won't meet the Cruz test
it was
we're
focused.
still there.
Well, that's a fair, but you asked the initial military action.
Well,
I think.
I'm saying, is there any military action from start to finish that meets the three-part Cruz test in the last 20 years?
You know, I would say, I mean, there haven't been that many military actions in the last 20 years. So, but I will say this: winning the Cold War, and this is where Reagan understood peace through strength.
I want to just quickly get in one other topic here, and we'll be done, which is what Mr. Trump said about Senator McCain's service. Do you have any problem with that?
Well, I'll tell you what I think of John McCain. John McCain is a friend of mine. He is an extraordinary American hero. I'm proud to serve with John McCain.
So you feel so strongly about that, as do your other colleagues running for president. Senator Rubio called what Donald Trump said offensive ranting. Your former governor, Rick Perry, said he should get out of the race. He's not qualified. Again, I'm not asking you to repudiate Donald Trump as a person. I don't think you're as good friends with him as some of the other people in the race who have been critical here. So I'm trying to understand what separates you from the others who have been, who feel this is sort of beyond the pale, what Donald Trump said.
Listen, I will happily tell you what I think about John McCain. I'll happily tell you my views on any issue. You want to talk immigration or Obamacare? I'm not going to engage in the media's game of bashing another Republican candidate. I'm just not going to do it.
Some people say the reason you're not doing it, and you haven't been critical of his previous comments, is because you want to make sure that if he does get out of the race, you're able to win the supporters that he has now. Is this a political calculation?
I am not going to go into the gutter with personal attacks and impugning character. Now, let me be clear. I do think policy distinctions are fair game. So I will talk about differences, whether it is on amnesty or Common Core or religious liberty or marriage or life or any other issue. That's what's supposed to be the bread and butter of politics. But I'm not going to engage in personal attacks impugning anyone else's character.
It's a matter for you of of both the kind of politics you want to practice as well as friendship and loyalty? Is that...
You know, my view on John McCain is explicit and unambiguous. He's an American hero and he's a friend. I'm not going to just take a stick to fellow Republicans, or for that matter, to Democrats. You know, in my time in the Senate, I haven't impugned the character of Republicans or Democrats. I don't intend to start today.
Right, okay. Senator, thanks very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Senator Cruz. And by the way, a new ABC News Washington Post poll just out puts Donald Trump up the top nationally at 24%, Scott Walker with 13%, Jeb Bush with 12%. Well, we'll be right back with Martin O'Malley. Now, my conversation in Cedar Rapids on Friday night with former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley. We started out by talking about his parents and his grandparents.
My mom's dad was leader of the Democratic Party in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and all through the Roosevelt years. And my dad's dad was a ward leader on the north side in Pittsburgh, in a neighborhood called Manchester during the years of Davy Lawrence as governor. And so they met in Washington, actually splicing together a Young Democrats newsletter of all things.
And were they very liberal Democrats? Were they more moderate? What were their politics like?
Well, my dad and mom were both, both Catholic, both very progressive in terms of social justice and what we would today call social justice. Right. What in their day they called common sense economics, that when people work hard, they earn a decent living. My dad went to college only because of the GI Bill. And so those were my parents. And I guess it was in college that with Ronald Reagan as a bit of a negative influence, I decided to work hard in that presidential year for the candidate I believed had the best shot of beating Ronald Reagan. Right. And that was a young, unknown 1% candidate named Gary Hart from Colorado. And I traveled across this state, actually, all through southeast Iowa. And I saw that, in fact, voters really do care about issues. They really do want to meet the candidates, and they're capable of processing a lot more thought and information than we sometimes get them credit for. And in Iowa, they're never intimidated by big money or polls or pundits. So that really kind of opened the door to me and made me think, wow, this can be done. A person can serve without being born a millionaire.
Was Gary Hart the first presidential candidate you ever met?
My mom says I was at a Hubert Humphrey rally.
But you don't have a distinct memory.
I don't have a memory.
But
and I doubt Hubert remembers me.
So he's the first presidential candidate you knew personally?
Yes.
Yeah. Tell us about how you met him and what you thought, what made you think he'd be the best president.
I went into his campaign headquarters around December 1983. I take that back, December 1982, with a friend of mine from high school who had kind of tipped me to his candidacy. I read a lot of the thoughtful stuff he was writing. He was talking about the fact that our times are new, our challenges are new, and our thinking and ideas have to be new in order to deal with these challenges and make our country stronger. And the more I learned about him, the more impressed I became at the thought and the ideas that were the substance of his candidacy. He was written off 3 times before his first amazing distant second-place victory, but he always kept the North Star of putting forward ideas that would serve our country, and that's what impressed me about him. And then after working for Senator Hart, I worked for Senator Mikulski in Maryland and then ran for city council myself.
For the last generation or two, we've had this question of what America's role should be in the world, and I think Iraq and Afghanistan have certainly left us in a place where people are wondering, are Americans going to be again willing to send troops overseas? Where do you think we are? Not necessarily where you are, but where are we as a country, do you think, now in this question of what is worth sending American men and women overseas to fight for?
I believe we're in search of a new story that makes sense of our most fundamental principles in a world that is now very different from the 90s or from the Cold War. And I believe that America's role in the world is to lead by example the rise of a global middle class. And I believe that the way we do that in these times is to create a foreign policy that's more about engagement and collaboration, a national security strategy that seeks new alliances to identify threats and to work with other nations to reduce them before we're kind of backed into a corner where it seems the only response is a military response, American boots on the ground or not. For example, one of the things that preceded the failure of the nation state of Syria and the rise of ISIS was the effect of climate change and the mega drought that affected that region, wiped out farmers, drove people to cities, created a humanitarian crisis that created the symptoms, or rather the the conditions of extreme poverty that has led now to the rise of ISIL and this extreme violence. So the pandemic in West Africa, there are many instances where we're behind the turning radius of a crisis and left with only military responses once it whips up and becomes too great.
Are you as good a presidential candidate as you thought you'd be?
I'm learning every day, man.
Yeah. What are you learning?
Oh, golly. I mean, you hope every day you learn in elective office.
Yeah.
I recall somebody once saying to me in the course of not this campaign, but another campaign, he said, I always look for an ability for my candidates to grow. But what he meant by that, I think, is that he wants to see candidates constantly questioning, intellectually curious, and recognizing that they are also human beings and have to constantly learn and bring together smart people that can help make the best decisions. That's what I've done for 15 years as an executive.
There are hard moments running for president for anybody, physically hard, emotionally hard. What do you rely on? Family, faith? What else besides family and faith to get through the harder parts?
What else is there?
Those are the two bedrocks?
Family and faith, really. I mean, I have my wife Katie and our 4 kids. I've been very blessed. The most important things we receive in life come to us as a gift, and certainly I have a great family, and I do take time to make sure I stay centered in my own faith and make sure I take some time for solitude. That's one of the first things that you lose in any campaign. If you're not careful, you lose any time for solitude. Yeah. And without solitude, there's no time for reflection, no time for prayer, and no time for really creative thought.
Last question. Let's say you don't win, possible. What would make this experience a success, even if you don't become president?
I would hope that all of us who choose to run for office do so because we believe we have something unique that is needed at this time in our country's history. And once we make that decision, then the choice is up to the people.
Our thanks to Martin O'Malley. And coming up, John Kasich meets Shia LaBeouf. I can't believe we got talked into doing this. You'll see it right after this.
At this moment, there are only 2 things you need to know. 1, John Kasich has been thinking about running for president for quite a while. And 2, Shia LaBeouf made a green screen motivational speech that can be applied to almost any scenario. Naturally, our producers put 2 and 2 together.
Let me ask you about where you are in this timetable.
Are you running? Are you interested in running?
When do you think you'll know?
When might you make an announcement one way or the other?
When are you going to make up your mind?
If I think I can win, I'm likely to do it.
Do it!
Are you going to do it? Well,
do it!
There's plenty of time for me to decide.
Don't let your dreams be dreams.
So within a period of time, I will make a decision.
Yesterday, you said tomorrow. So just do it!
If I get in and I win, it'll be great.
Make your dreams come true!
If I do run, it'll be zany.
Just do it!
Well, as you probably know, I'm going to have a big announcement on the 21st.
Tomorrow live in Columbus, Ohio at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Till then, sayonara.